Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving into a huge Supreme Court case that really hit home for thousands of government employees. It all revolved around a pretty basic question. When does a bonus or an allowance count as taxable income? Well, the answer turned out to be more complicated than you might think.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with the tax rule that got this whole thing started. Then, we'll get into the legal arguments from both sides. After that, we'll break down how the Supreme Court made its call, and finally, what the lasting judgment really means for everyone.
So, our story kicks off back in 2014. The country's tax agency, the Bureau of Internal Revenue, dropped a new directive that basically put a whole bunch of government employee benefits right under the microscope.
And this is the document right at the heart of it all. Revenue Memorandum Order, or RMO 23-2014. Now, its stated purpose seemed pretty simple. It was just supposed to be a reminder to all government agencies that, hey, you're an employer and you have to withhold taxes from your employees' pay.
But here's where it got messy. This RMO explicitly listed all these benefits. Benefits that, government workers had been getting for years, assuming they were tax-free. And it said, nope, these are now officially taxable income. Suddenly, everything from your anniversary bonus to your grocery allowance was on the hook for withholding tax.
As you can imagine, this new rule did not go over well at all. It led straight to a massive legal battle, pitting various government employee unions and associations against the tax agency itself.
So on one side, you had the employee groups. They argued that this RMO was illegal, that it cut their take-home pay and stepped on the independence of their agencies. But on the other side, the BIR just held firm, saying, look, we're not making new rules. We are simply enforcing the law that's already on the books. And that really brought things to a head. You have two totally different interpretations of the law clashing. So the big question became, who's right? How would the highest court in the land settle this?
All right, so the case makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the justices had to go through every single legal issue piece by piece to figure this whole thing out. So, first things first, the court went back to basics. It reinforced a really fundamental tax principle. The law defines compensation income incredibly broadly. It doesn't matter what you call it, a bonus, an allowance, a gift. If you get it for services you provided, the law pretty much sees it as taxable income. And because of that broad definition, the court upheld the core of the tax rule. It decided that the RMO didn't actually create any new taxes. It was really just clarifying what was already written in the law. And that's a crucial difference, right? It was a clarification, not a new creation. The court's reasoning here was really solid. They said, look, fiscal autonomy that independence government branches have doesn't mean you get a free pass on taxes. They also said that taxing income isn't legally the same as cutting someone's benefits. And finally, the tax laws have to apply to everyone equally, whether you work for the government or a private company. But, and this is a really big but, the employee groups did score a major victory. Because when the court looked closer at who was supposed to be responsible for withholding these taxes, they found a problem. They looked at Section V of the order, and they declared it null and void. Why? Well, because the tax code is super specific. It says that financial officers, people like treasurers and chief accountants, are responsible for withholding taxes, not the chief executives like governors or mayors. In other words, the Commissioner of Internal Revenue had overstepped their authority. By adding all these other officials to the list, the CIR wasn't just interpreting the law anymore. They were trying to change it. And that's a power that only the legislature or maybe the Secretary of Finance has.
So, after all that back and forth, what was the final verdict? What's the big takeaway from all of this?
The court's final order was really a split decision, a partial win for both sides. The tax rule itself was upheld, but the list of who was responsible was struck down. But then the court did something crucial. It said the ruling would only apply prospectively, meaning it only takes effect from the day of the decision, not in the past.
And that perspective part is so important. It was an act of fairness. The court basically said, look, these employees were getting these benefits in good faith for years, thinking they were non-taxable. We're not going to suddenly hit them with a massive bill for back taxes they didn't even know they owed. And all of this leaves us with a really powerful and lasting doctrine that while independence for different branches of government is absolutely essential, it doesn't put anyone above the law, especially when it comes to the shared responsibility of paying taxes. So that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What do you think is the right balance between government autonomy and the fundamental obligation to contribute to the nation?